Hey there, it's Chris from Good Roads. Coming up on the channel, I'm going to be showing you guys how to use a vacuum bag to press a deck using veneers. And for my money, that is the absolute easiest way to press a deck with veneers, because if you use a vacuum bag, you only need a one-sided mold. See, a veneer deck requires very even, precise pressure all the way throughout the board as you're pressing it, and if you're using a traditional press and a two-part mold, those two halves need to be perfectly aligned in order to get that even pressure throughout the deck. And if you're making your molds by hand, that level of precision can be very, very difficult to achieve. With a vacuum bag, you don't need that level of precision because you only need half of the mold. That means that you don't have to do all the very, very detailed work of getting the curves to match each other. It's really no more difficult than making a dim mold the way that I've shown here on the channel before. So in this video, I'm going to go through the whole process of making a one-sided mold that you can use to press a deck using a vacuum bag. I'm actually going to be making a mold for a mountain board deck prototype, but all the techniques I'm going to be using here are exactly the same if you're making a skateboard or a longboard or whatever other kind of board you're trying to press. The first thing I'm going to do is to make myself a template of the nose to tail profile of the board. This is going to be the nose and the tail and any other camber or rocker your deck has. I designed mine on the computer, printed it in sections, and I'm using some spray adhesive to back it on some plywood. If you're interested in my thinking on this mountain board deck, one of the things I'm experimenting with is having a couple degrees of rocker underfoot with some camber in the middle. The company Harrow makes mountain board decks with a flat profile underfoot, and Flow, the snowboard company, makes their bindings with a 3-degree rocker. The idea being that it aligns better with how the angles of our legs work and makes for a more comfortable ride. So next I cut out my template. You don't need to be super precise with this step, just get it as close to the line as possible. We're going to be refining things in later steps. So there's my nose, tail, and the combo rocker, camber, rocker profile that I've got going on in the middle. Next, we're going to need material for the actual mold, and for that we're going to use rigid foam insulation. You want something with an R value of 8 or more. A higher R value means a denser foam, which means it'll be easier to shape, and it means that the mold will stand up to more abuse over time. I'm cutting mine into strips that are the height of my deck, and I'm making enough strips so that when they're laid side by side, they make up the whole width of the mold. In my case, the mold is 9 inches wide, so I cut myself 9 sheets, and I cut myself some extra just in case. I'm using foam board that's 1 inch thick because that's what I had around, but using a thicker sheet would mean less cutting and less gluing. Next up, I'm going through and transferring my template onto each of the staves of foam. Then it's over to the bandsaw to cut them all out. Once they're all cut, they need to be glued together. I've used a lot of different glues to do this over the years, and I haven't been particularly happy with any of them. So this time I'm trying spray adhesive. I'm pretty satisfied with how fast and easy it was to use, but it did make a sticky mess all over everything, so I'm glad I laid down paper to protect my workbench. I sprayed adhesive onto the staves and glued them together in sections, doing my best to keep the profiles aligned. And once all the sections were glued together, I had a roughed out block for my mold. The next step is to level out all the places where the foam staves are uneven, so that we have a nice flat surface to work from. I did the bulk of that work using a microplane, and then came back with a random orbital sander and some 80 grit paper to finish the job. Now that we've got the shape of our nose to tail profile in place, it's time to add our edge to edge geometry. This is going to be any concave, gas pedals, wheel wells, or similar features that we want to add to our board. I'm starting by giving myself some reference lines, marking the center line of the board and also the mid line of the mold so that I can keep my features aligned. Since I'm making this experimental mountain board shape, I also gave myself some lines to mark where those rockered sections of the deck are. That's where my bindings are gonna go, so that's where I'm gonna add concave to the deck. For other types of decks, you'd probably want concave going the whole length of the edges up to the pockets at the nose and tail. Which brings me to another part of this board geometry that I'm experimenting with. I'm gonna try an asymmetrical concave. When I shot the T-Ride video, I noticed that my heel side turns took more oomph to execute, and similar to how snowboard manufacturers have been experimenting with asymmetrical side cut radiuses, I was wondering what asymmetry would look like on a mountain board deck. There are a couple examples of that on the market already. MBS's Comp 95 deck takes a shot at addressing this issue with an asymmetric concave that puts more pronounced wedge under your heels than your toes. I'm super curious about how that would work, so I decided to give it a shot with this mold. I marked the shapes for my concave sections and got to work carving them into the mold using a rasp and microplane. And again, I came back and cleaned everything up with a palm sander. The foam on its own will flex and bend in a vac bag, so to make sure the mold keeps its shape, I'm backing mine on some plywood. I'm just using hot glue to keep it in place. And that's really all it is to it. The mold's done. This one happens to be a super weird experimental mountain board shape with a rocker camber rocker profile between the nose and tail and asymmetrical concave, but you can use the exact same techniques to make a mold for skateboard or longboard decks of all different levels of complexity. So, I'm pretty excited. I have been wanting to do a mountain board build for a very long time, and a lot of the features that I integrated into this mold that I'm going to be putting into this deck are things that I have been dreaming about for a while. So in the next video, I'm going to show you guys how we can use a mold of this style along with a vacuum bag to press a deck. I'm pretty excited about that. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to show you guys kind of a more advanced pressing technique and a way that you can fairly easily start using veneers instead of plywood, like I've shown off in some of the other builds on this channel. So I want to get you guys out there using the better materials, making the higher quality boards, and I think this is going to be the easiest way to do it. So if you're interested in seeing how this mold gets used, if you're interested in seeing the vacuum bag technique, why not subscribe, stick around for the next video and all the other future DIY board sport videos we do on the channel. I gotta give a big shout out to my patrons. I just wrapped up a whole bunch of urethane projects and they came out great. They were a huge help in helping to fund that, getting me materials in order to do that. So we'll have some really cool content on casting skateboard parts coming up on the channel soon. Thank them. If you guys want to chip in and support, check out the Patreon. If you have questions or comments, leave them down below. I'm kind of missing the discussion. It's been a little quiet lately. So, you want to chat with me about board building, leave a message down below. I do my best to get to all of them. Thanks as always for sticking along with me on the journey. And until next time, I'll see you guys soon. Hey there, it's Chris. Look at this. Let me get this under control. Hair's getting pretty wily. Can't remember the last time I had a haircut.